Lisa Martinez stared at the computer screen and rubbed her tired eyes. She had been working the night shift at Cerberus Station for 3 months now, and the endless black of space was starting to get to her. The monitoring station floated at the edge of the Sol system, like a metal guardian, watching for anything that might threaten Earth and its colonies. Most nights brought nothing but cosmic dust and radiation from distant stars. Tonight felt different, though. The sensors were picking up something strange, buried deep in the background noise of the universe. Lisa adjusted the filters and tried to clean up the signal. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. The pattern was too complex to be natural, and too organized to be random interference. She called over to her supervisor, Jake Morrison, who was drinking coffee and reading reports from the inner planets. Jake was an old soldier who had seen action in the Mars colonies and the asteroid mining wars. His face was weathered and his gray hair showed the stress of too many battles. He walked over to Lisa's station with the slow, careful steps of someone who had learned not to rush into unknown situations. Jake looked at the data streaming across Lisa's screen and frowned. The signal was definitely artificial, but unlike anything in their databases. It seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat or breathing. There were mathematical sequences mixed with what looked like biological markers. Most disturbing of all was the emotional undertone that seemed to scream desperation across the void of space. Dr. Helen Carter arrived at the station an hour later after Jake called her from her quarters. Helen was the chief science officer and one of the smartest people Jake had ever met. She had degrees in xenobiology and quantum communications and had spent years trying to figure out how to talk to alien species if humanity ever found any. Tonight it looked like her work might finally be put to the test. Helen ran the signal through every analysis program the station had. She broke it down into component parts and studied each piece like a detective examining clues. The mathematical sequences were definitely intentional and followed patterns that could only come from an intelligent mind. The biological markers suggested the signal came from a living creature rather than a machine. Most importantly, the emotional content was unmistakable even across species barriers. This was a distress call, and whoever sent it was dying. The signal was coming from the Kepler 442 system over 1,200 light-years away. Helen calculated that the message had been traveling through space for over 1,000 years before reaching Earth. Whatever crisis had prompted the call was ancient by human standards, but might still be happening if the aliens lived longer than humans. Jake immediately sent a priority message to Terra Command on Earth. Admiral Susan Blake received the report while she was reviewing fleet deployments in her office, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Susan had gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded ships in every major conflict for the past 20 years and was known throughout the fleet as someone who made hard decisions when others hesitated. The report from Cerberus Station landed on her desk like a bomb. Humanity had been searching for signs of alien life for centuries and had found nothing but silence. Now they had proof that intelligence existed beyond Earth, and it was asking for help. The question was what to do about it. Most of Susan's advisors recommended caution. The signal was over 1,000 years old, and the aliens might already be dead. Even if they were still alive, the distance made any rescue mission impossible with current technology. The newest ships could barely reach nearby star systems and would take decades to travel 1,200 light-years. Susan dismissed her advisors and sat alone in her office thinking. She had spent her entire career preparing for threats to humanity, but had never considered that humans might be the ones doing the rescuing. The idea that some alien species might need Earth's help was both thrilling and terrifying. She opened a secure file on her computer and studied the specifications for humanity's most advanced and secret military project. The Deathworld fleet had been built in hidden shipyards beyond Neptune over the past 10 years. The ships were designed based on everything humans had learned about survival on Earth and in the harsh environments of space. Earth was what the few alien signals humanity had intercepted called a death world. The planet was so dangerous that most species would consider it uninhabitable. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, ice ages, asteroid impacts, and mass extinctions had shaped every aspect of human evolution. Where other species developed on peaceful worlds, humans had been forged in the fires of constant danger. The Deathworld fleet reflected that heritage. The ships were built to survive anything the universe could throw at them, and their crews were trained in tactics that would seem insane to species from gentler worlds. The fleet had never been tested in real combat, but Susan knew it represented humanity's best hope if they ever faced a serious threat. Now she was considering using that fleet not to defend Earth, but to help strangers who might already be dead. It was the kind of decision that could end her career or make her the most important admiral in human history. Susan activated her secure communication system and sent orders to the 7 ships of the Deathworld fleet. The flagship USS Ragnarok would lead the mission with Admiral Blake herself in command. The assault carriers, USS Fenrir and USS Jormungandr, would provide fighter support and ground troops. The heavy destroyers, USS Cerberus and USS Hydra, would handle any serious threats they encountered. The specialized deep strike vessels, USS Nemesis and USS Apocalypse, would deal with anything too dangerous for the other ships. Each ship was crewed by volunteers who had been selected for their ability to think and fight in impossible situations. They were soldiers and scientists and engineers who had survived the worst Earth and space could offer. They were about to become humanity's first ambassadors to the stars. Susan watched through her office window as the first ships of the fleet began moving toward the outer system. She knew she was gambling with humanity's most advanced technology and best people on a mission that might accomplish nothing. But she also knew that if the situations were reversed, she would want someone to answer Earth's call for help. The Deathworld fleet engaged their experimental Alcubierre drives and disappeared into the darkness between stars. Behind them, Earth continued its ancient dance around the sun, unaware that its children were about to change the galaxy forever. Ahead lay 1,200 light-years of empty space, and whatever remained of an alien civilization that had screamed across the void for help. Susan Blake had just committed humanity to its first interstellar war. The USS Ragnarok cut through space like a metal predator, hunting in the dark. Commander Nathan Price stood on the bridge watching stars shift and bend as the Alcubierre drive folded space around them. He had commanded warships for 15 years, but had never traveled faster than light before. The sensation was like being inside a bubble racing through an ocean of twisted reality. Nathan was a tall man with brown hair and steady hands that never shook even in the worst combat situations. He had earned his command by surviving the siege of Europa and the battle for the asteroid belt. His crew trusted him because he always brought them home alive. Now he was leading them farther from home than any human had ever traveled. The bridge. Crew worked quietly at their stations, monitoring the exotic physics that pushed them between stars. Chief Engineer Danny Walsh reported that the drive was performing better than expected. Danny was a small man with quick fingers and a mind that understood machines better than most people understood other humans. He had designed half the systems on the ship and could fix the other half with spare parts and determination. Weapons Chief Maria Santos checked her combat systems for the 100th time since leaving Earth. Maria had scars on her arms from fighting in the tunnels under Mars during the Colonial Rebellion. She knew that weapons meant nothing if you hesitated to use them. Her job was to make sure the Ragnarok could destroy anything that threatened the fleet or their mission. The other ships of the Deathworld fleet maintained formation around the flagship. Captain Ryan Torres commanded the USS Fenrir with the aggressive confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Ryan believed that the best defense was always a devastating attack. His ship carried enough firepower to level a city, and troops trained to fight in any environment. Captain Nicole Webb led the USS Jormungandr with the careful precision of a surgeon. Nicole had started her career as a reconnaissance pilot and learned that information was often more valuable than weapons. Her ship specialized in stealth operations and gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities. She preferred to know everything about a threat before engaging it. Dr. Helen Carter worked in the science section, analyzing every piece of data they collected during the journey. She had joined the mission to study the alien signal, but was learning more about space travel than xenobiology. The Alcubierre drive created sensor effects that revealed things about the universe that no human had ever seen before. 3 days into the journey, they encountered the first evidence that something terrible was happening in the galaxy. The sensors detected debris fields in systems that should have been empty. Helen studied the wreckage and found traces of metals and alloys that did not match any known natural processes. Someone had built ships and stations in these systems, and someone else had destroyed them completely. Amy Foster was the fleet's xenobiologist, and she examined every fragment they collected. Amy was young and brilliant and had spent years preparing for first contact with alien species. What she found in the debris made her question everything she thought she knew about life in the universe. The wreckage contained organic compounds that had been consumed and transformed into something entirely different. The pattern became clear as they traveled deeper into space. System after system showed signs of the same devastating attack. Planets stripped of their atmospheres, moons cracked open and hollowed out, asteroid belts scattered as if something had fed on the rocky material itself. Whatever had created this path of destruction was not interested in conquest or territory. It was interested in consumption. Nathan called a meeting of the ship commanders to discuss what they were seeing. The conference room on the Ragnarok was designed for wartime briefings, with displays that could show tactical information and threat assessments. Tonight it showed a map of dead systems stretching across hundreds of light years. Captain Torres wanted to increase speed and reach the alien homeworld as quickly as possible. He argued that speed was their only advantage against an enemy that could destroy entire solar systems. Captain Webb disagreed and wanted to study the destruction patterns to learn more about their opponent before engaging. Dr. Carter supported Webb's position while Commander Price tried to find a middle path that balanced caution with urgency. The debate was interrupted when Amy Foster burst into the room with a data pad in her hands. She had been analyzing the most recent debris field and had made a discovery that changed everything. The organic compounds in the wreckage were not just consumed, but incorporated into the attacking force. Whatever was destroying these civilizations was learning from them and growing stronger with each victory. Nathan made the decision to continue toward the Kepler 442 system, but to gather as much intelligence as possible along the way. The fleet began stopping at each destroyed system to collect samples and analyze the attack patterns. What they found painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything in human military history. The attackers moved in coordinated waves that suggested hive mind intelligence. They targeted population centers first, then industrial facilities, then natural resources. They left nothing behind that could support life or civilization. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to adapt their tactics based on the defenses they encountered. Helen discovered that the attacks were getting more sophisticated as they moved closer to the alien homeworld. Early battle sites showed crude destruction, while later ones revealed complex strategies and advanced technology. The enemy was learning and evolving with each conquest. Kevin Brown was the fleet's tactical officer, and he spent hours studying the attack patterns. Kevin had trained at the War College on Luna and specialized in asymmetric warfare. He knew that conventional tactics would be useless against an enemy that could adapt faster than human commanders could plan. The breakthrough came when they reached a system only 50 light-years from their destination. The destruction here was recent enough that some satellites were still broadcasting automated distress signals. Helen and Amy worked together to decode the alien transmissions and piece together what had happened. The defenders had been a species called the Melodians, who communicated through harmonic frequencies. They had detected the approaching threat and tried to negotiate rather than fight. The attackers had studied their attempts at communication, then used that knowledge to jam their command frequencies during the final assault. Nathan realized they were not just facing a powerful enemy, but an intelligent one that would try to use humanity's own strengths against them. The fleet would need to be unpredictable and chaotic in ways that even humans found difficult to understand. As they approached the final jump to the Kepler 442 system, the crew of the Ragnarok prepared for whatever they might find. Nathan ordered all ships to battle stations and reviewed the mission parameters one last time. They were 1,200 light-years from Earth with no backup and no reinforcements. Whatever happened next would determine whether humanity's first contact with alien life would be a rescue mission or a war. The Deathworld fleet dropped out of Alcubierre Drive at the edge of the Kepler 442 system and immediately went silent running. Nathan Price watched the tactical displays populate with contacts as the sensors swept the system. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. 3 massive ships hung in orbit around the alien homeworld like mechanical vultures waiting for their prey to die. Each ship was easily 10 times larger than the biggest human vessel and built from what looked like living metal that shifted and flowed as they watched. Smaller craft swarmed around the planet's surface like insects harvesting everything they could reach. The planet itself was a patchwork of brown scars where green continents had once existed. 2 of its 3 moons were completely gone, while the third was being systematically stripped of material by mining platforms. The system's asteroid belt had been reduced to scattered dust and debris. Helen Carter studied the sensor readings and felt sick to her stomach. The aliens who had sent the distress call were being consumed alive, and their beautiful world was being turned into raw materials for the invaders. She estimated that perhaps 10% of the planet's surface remained untouched, and that would be gone within days. Admiral Blake arrived on the bridge of the Ragnarok and studied the tactical situation. Susan had commanded fleets in battle before, but had never faced an enemy this powerful or this alien. The 3 Harvester ships outgunned her entire fleet, and there were dozens of smaller craft that could probably handle a human destroyer on their own. Amy Foster was monitoring communications frequencies and picked up a faint transmission from the planet's surface. The signal was weak and filled with static, but she could make out harmonic patterns that suggested intelligence. She worked with Helen to clean up the transmission, and discovered they were hearing the voice of someone trying to coordinate evacuations from the advancing harvesters. The speaker was using mathematical concepts mixed with musical tones in a way that was completely foreign to human thinking. Amy had studied xenolinguistics for years, but had never encountered anything like this. It took her 3 hours to build a basic translation matrix that could convert the alien language into something humans could understand. The first clear message they received was a plea for help directed at empty space. The alien was broadcasting on multiple frequencies, hoping that someone somewhere might hear them and come to their aid. The desperation in the harmonics was unmistakable even across species. Barriers. Nathan made the decision to attempt first contact despite the obvious dangers. He ordered Amy to prepare a response using the translation matrix while keeping the fleet hidden behind the system's outer planets. If the harvesters detected them too early, the mission would end before it began. Amy's first message was simple: mathematics followed by harmonic patterns that indicated peaceful intent. She broadcast it toward the planet's surface and waited for a response. What came back was a shockwave of harmonics that nearly overloaded their communication systems. The alien response was filled with amazement, terror, and desperate hope. Amy worked frantically to translate the flood of information while Helen helped interpret the emotional undertones. The alien introduced herself as Lyrelai of the Singing Winds and identified herself as the leader of her people's remaining survivors. Lyrelai explained that her people were called Zephyrians and had lived on their world for millions of years without ever knowing war or conflict. They were philosophers and artists who communicated through harmonic frequencies and had never developed weapons or military tactics. The harvesters had arrived 6 months ago and had been systematically consuming their civilization ever since. The revelation that shocked both species was the discovery that humans were what the galaxy called Deathworlders. Lyrelai's people had detected a few other species over the millennia, but all of them had fled when they learned about conditions on their respective homeworlds. Earth sounded like a nightmare realm to the peaceful Zephyrians. Helen tried to explain that Earth's dangerous environment had made humans stronger and more adaptable. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and predators had forced humanity to develop technology and tactics that could handle any threat. What seemed like suffering to the Zephyrians was actually humanity's greatest strength. Kevin Brown analyzed the harvester fleet and found patterns in their behavior that reminded him of insect colonies. The smaller ships followed predictable routes while the larger vessels remained stationary except when moving to new harvest sites. They operated with mechanical efficiency but showed no signs of creative thinking or tactical flexibility. This gave Nathan an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. Human military doctrine was based on chaos and unpredictability because Earth's environment had taught humanity that survival required constant adaptation. The harvesters seemed to operate like a machine following programmed instructions. If the humans could introduce enough chaos into the situation, they might be able to disrupt the harvester operations. Captain Torres loved the idea and volunteered to lead the first attack with his assault carrier. Captain Webb was more cautious and wanted to gather more intelligence before committing to battle. Dr. Carter worried that fighting might make the harvesters increase their consumption rate and kill the remaining Zephyrians even faster. Nathan decided to attempt a rescue operation rather than a direct assault. The USS Jormungandr would use its stealth capabilities to reach the planet's surface, while the other ships created diversions to draw the harvesters away from population centers. It was a complex plan that required precise timing and the kind of environmental adaptation that only Deathworld natives could manage. Lyrelai provided coordinates for the largest surviving city where nearly 1 million Zephyrians were hiding in underground shelters. The harvesters had not yet discovered the tunnels but were systematically destroying everything on the surface. Once they finished consuming the cities, they would start mining operations that would collapse the underground refuges. Major Sam Mitchell led the ground team that would establish contact with the Zephyrians and coordinate evacuations. Sam was a veteran of urban warfare who had learned to fight in the ruins of bombed cities and collapsed buildings. His team included specialists in hostile environment operations and emergency medical procedures. The mission began when Captain Webb brought the USS Jormungandr within transporter range of the planet's surface. The stealth systems kept them hidden from harvester sensors, while the ground team prepared to beam down into an active war zone. Sam's team carried equipment designed for disaster relief operations rather than military assault. As the team materialized, in the ruins of the Zephyrian capital, Sam was struck by the beauty of what remained. The alien architecture was based on natural harmonics and seemed to sing even as it crumbled. The Zephyrians had built their cities to work with their planet's natural resonance rather than fighting against it. The first Zephyrian Sam encountered was a being that looked like a cross between a flower and a crystal. It communicated through musical tones that Amy's translation equipment could barely handle. The creature was terrified of the humans until Sam demonstrated that they were there to help rather than harm. Word spread quickly through the underground shelters that the Deathworlders had come to answer their distress call. The Zephyrians could not understand why anyone would voluntarily enter a harvester-occupied system, but they were grateful beyond words for any hope of survival. Sam's team began organizing evacuations, while Admiral Blake positioned the fleet for the most audacious rescue operation in human history. Admiral Blake watched the tactical display and calculated the odds of success. The Harvester fleet had noticed unusual activity around the planet but had not yet identified the human ships hiding in the asteroid debris. She had perhaps an hour before their stealth systems would be overwhelmed by the enemy's active scanning. It was time to show these silicon monsters what Deathworld tactics looked like. The plan was insane by any normal military standard, but perfectly logical for humans, who had learned warfare from surviving on a planet that tried to kill them daily. Captain Torres would lead the USS Fenrir and USS Cerberus in a direct assault on the smallest Harvester mothership. This would draw the main enemy fleet away from the planet while the evacuation continued. Ryan Torres grinned as he received his orders. The USS Fenrir was loaded with enough firepower to crack a moon, and his crew was eager to test their weapons against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy. He had studied the Harvester ship movements and identified weaknesses in their formation that reminded him of hunting pack predators on Earth. The assault began when the Fenrir dropped its stealth field and opened fire with every weapon system it carried. Plasma cannons and fusion torpedoes slammed into the Harvester ship's hull while fighter squadrons launched to engage the smaller enemy craft. The attack was so sudden and violent that the Harvesters needed several minutes to organize a response. Captain Webb used the distraction to position the USS Jormungandr directly above the largest Zephyrian city. Her ship's transporters began, beaming survivors directly from the underground shelters to the ship's cargo bays. The operation required precise coordination between Major Mitchell's ground teams and the ship's transport chiefs. Linda Hayes led one of the ground teams through the tunnel systems beneath the ruined capital. Linda was a sergeant who had earned her rank fighting in the urban warfare campaigns on Mars. She knew how to move through destroyed buildings and collapsed infrastructure without making noise or leaving traces for enemies to follow. The Zephyrians were unlike anything in human experience, but Linda treated them the same way she would treat human civilians in a disaster zone. She organized them into groups small enough to transport quickly while keeping them calm enough to follow instructions. The alien children clung to their parents and sang soft harmonies that reminded Linda of lullabies. Above the planet, the battle was spreading as more harvester ships moved to engage the human attackers. Captain Torres had succeeded in drawing 2 of the 3 motherships away from the planet, but his ships were taking heavy damage from enemy weapons that seemed to learn and adapt with each exchange of fire. Danny Walsh worked frantically in the engine room of the USS Ragnarok to keep their stealth systems operational. The harvester scanning frequencies were shifting constantly as they tried to locate the hidden human ships. Danny had to manually adjust the stealth field generators every few minutes to stay ahead of their detection algorithms. Dr. Carter made a discovery that changed everything when she analyzed the harmonic frequencies the Zephyrians used for communication. The aliens were not just talking to each other, but were actually resonating with their planet's crystalline core structure. This natural harmonic field was what gave their world its unique beauty and stability. Amy Foster realized that the harvester consumption process was disrupting the planet's harmonic resonance and causing the ecosystem collapse they were witnessing. The Silicon invaders were not just consuming matter, but were destroying the very thing that made the world habitable for its native species. More importantly, Amy discovered that the harmonic field could be weaponized if the Zephyrians could be convinced to sing in unison across the entire planet. The resonance would create interference patterns that could disrupt the harvester ship's quantum matrix systems. It would require thousands of Zephyrians working together in perfect harmony. Lirelei listened to Amy's proposal through the translation system and was horrified by the implications. Her people had never used their natural abilities as weapons, and the idea of turning their sacred harmonies into instruments of destruction went against everything they believed. But she also knew that without drastic action, her entire species would be extinct within days. The debate was interrupted when the USS Cerberus reported critical damage to its main reactor. Captain Torres had pushed his ships beyond their design limits and was paying the price. The Cerberus was losing power and would be unable to maintain its defensive fields much longer. Nathan made the difficult decision to commit the USS Ragnarok to direct combat. The flagship was humanity's most advanced warship, but it was also the most important target for the harvesters. If they lost the Ragnarok, they would lose their command and control capabilities along with their best chance of getting home. The Ragnarok dropped its stealth field and engaged the nearest harvester mothership with weapons that had been designed to fight in the chaos of asteroid fields and solar flares. Human military technology was built to function in environments that would destroy most alien equipment. The harsh conditions of Earth's solar system had taught humanity to build things that could survive anything. Kevin Brown coordinated the fleet's tactical movements from the Ragnarok's bridge while monitoring the evacuation progress. They had successfully transported nearly 500,000 Zephyrians to safety, but there were still twice that many hiding in shelters across the planet. The harvester ships were beginning to ignore the human attacks and focus on accelerating their consumption operations. The situation became desperate when sensors detected the harvesters beginning deep core mining operations that would destabilize the planet's crust. If they succeeded in reaching the harmonic core, the resulting seismic activity would kill every remaining Zephyrian, even if they were safely underground. Lirelei made the agonizing decision to ask her people to sing the world, song as a weapon. She broadcast instructions across the planet's remaining communication networks, asking every Zephyrian to join their voice to the harmonic resonance at precisely the same moment. It would be the first time in their species' history that they had intentionally used their abilities to cause harm. Major Mitchell's teams worked to establish harmonic amplifiers in key locations across the planet's surface. The devices were hastily modified from the Jormungandr's communication systems and would boost the Zephyrian voices enough to affect the harvester ships in orbit. The USS Nemesis and USS Apocalypse revealed themselves and began targeted strikes on the harvester mining platforms. These specialized deep strike vessels carried experimental weapons designed to penetrate heavily defended installations. Their attack runs were coordinated with the planned harmonic assault to maximize disruption of harvester operations. As the human ships pressed their attack and the evacuation continued, Lyra prepared to lead her people in a song that would either save their world or damn their souls. The harmonic weapon was ready, and the Deathworld fleet was in position for the final assault. The fate of two species hung in the balance as the battle reached its climax above the dying world of Zephyria. The moment arrived with the precision of a symphony conductor raising their baton. Lyra stood in the largest underground chamber, surrounded by 10,000 Zephyrians who had chosen to risk everything on a desperate gamble. Her voice rose in the opening notes of the world's song and was joined by voices from across the planet as her people sang together for the last time. The harmonic resonance built slowly at first, then exploded outward from the planet's crystalline core like a wave of pure sound. The amplifiers Major Mitchell had placed magnified the effect until it reached into space itself and struck the harvester ships with frequencies they had never encountered before. Admiral Blake watched from the bridge of the USS Ragnarok as the enemy formation began to waver. The massive harvester motherships were designed to handle any conventional weapon, but they had no defense against attacks that targeted their quantum matrix foundations. The harmonic waves disrupted their hive-mind communications and caused system failures throughout their fleet. Captain Torres seized the opportunity and led the USS Fenrir in a desperate ramming attack against the largest harvester ship. The Fenrir's hull had been stripped of non-essential equipment and packed with fusion warheads that would detonate on impact. Ryan knew he was sacrificing his ship and probably his life, but he also knew it would create the opening the fleet needed. The Fenrir struck the harvester mothership just as its defenses collapsed from harmonic interference. The explosion lit up the system like a new star as both ships were consumed in nuclear fire. The remaining harvester vessels immediately began emergency maneuvers to escape the expanding debris field and the continuing harmonic assault. Captain Webb brought the USS Jormungandr out of stealth for a final transport run to evacuate the Zephyrians who had participated in the harmonic weapon. The ship was overloaded with refugees, but Nicole refused to leave anyone behind who had risked their lives to save their world. The planet's surface was shaking as the harmonic resonance continued to build. Dr. Carter realized that the Zephyrians had tapped into more power than they had intended and were in danger of causing seismic activity that would destroy what remained of their world. The harmonic weapon was working too well. Amy Foster worked frantically with Lyra to modulate the resonance and bring it under control. The Zephyrian leader was exhausted from coordinating the planet-wide song, but she understood that they needed to shift from destruction to healing. Her people began changing their harmonies from warfare to restoration. The effect was immediate and miraculous. Instead of tearing the planet apart, the modified resonance began to stabilize the damaged ecosystem. The harmonic frequencies that had disrupted the harvester ships now worked to repair the crystalline structures that supported all life on Zephyria. Linda Hayes led the last evacuation team through collapsing tunnels as the planet's crust shifted and reformed around them. The Zephyrian children sang soft melodies that seemed to calm the Earth itself, while their parents carried the injured and elderly toward the transport zones. The harvester fleet was in full retreat by the time the USS Cerberus limped back to rejoin the formation. The damaged destroyer had barely survived the battle, but her crew had proven that human engineering could withstand punishment that would destroy most alien technology. Captain Torres had been rescued from the Fenrir before the ramming attack, but his ship was gone. Nathan Price coordinated the final phases of the rescue operation while monitoring the approaching harvester reinforcements. The enemy had called for additional ships when their initial force was defeated, but they would not arrive for several hours. The human fleet had enough time to complete the evacuation and escape before facing fresh enemies. The USS Nemesis and USS Apocalypse finished their attacks on the harvester mining platforms and returned to formation. Their specialized weapons had been devastatingly effective against the alien technology, but they had also exhausted most of their ammunition. The deep strike vessels would need to resupply before engaging in another major battle. Lyreley met Admiral Blake in person when she was transported to the USS Ragnarok with the other Zephyrian leaders. The alien was beautiful in a way that reminded Susan of living crystal, and her musical voice carried harmonics that touched something deep in human consciousness. Despite their vast differences, both leaders understood the bond that had been forged between their species. The Zephyrians had learned that strength could coexist with beauty, and that sometimes violence was necessary to preserve peace. The humans had discovered that their Deathworld heritage could be used to protect rather than just destroy. Both species had been forever changed by their encounter. Helen Carter worked with Lyreley to establish permanent communication protocols that would allow the two species to stay in contact across the vast distances of space. The Zephyrians had harmonic technology that could transmit faster than light, while humans had quantum entanglement systems that could provide instantaneous communication. The combined fleet prepared to depart the Kepler 442 system with nearly 2 million Zephyrian refugees aboard their ships. Many of the aliens would eventually return to rebuild their world, but others chose to journey with the humans to establish new colonies among the stars. As the ships engaged their Alcubierre drives, Admiral Blake received a priority message from Terra Command. Harvester attacks had been detected in dozens of other systems, and the galaxy was calling for help from the species that had achieved the first victory against the Silicon destroyers. Susan looked at the tactical displays showing the scope of the galactic crisis and realized that humanity's role in the universe had fundamentally changed. Earth was no longer an isolated world at the edge of nowhere, but the home of the galaxy's protectors. The Deathworld fleet had become the nucleus of a growing alliance as more species joined the fight against the harvesters. Ships from a dozen different civilizations followed the human vessels into battle, bringing their own unique technologies and capabilities to the struggle. Nathan stood on the bridge of the USS Ragnarok and watched the stars ahead where other worlds waited for rescue. The crew that had started this mission as explorers had become veterans of interstellar warfare. They had learned that the universe was both more dangerous and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. The final message from Zephyria was a harmonic broadcast that could be heard across half the galaxy. Lyreley sang the story of the Deathworlders, who had traveled 1,200 light years to answer a cry for help from strangers. Her voice carried the promise that no world would face the harvesters alone as long as humanity survived. Admiral Blake set course for the next crisis, while the rescued Zephyrians began planning their new lives among the stars. The Death World. Fleet had found its purpose, and the galaxy had found its guardians. The age of human isolation was over, and the age of galactic protection had begun.